Hello and welcome back to Bella Graffito Art. I am Kirsten. We're going to try to make this intro real short. I didn't have time to do my hair today, okay? So we are going to be doing this lovely galaxy with a tree line on some watercolor paper, and there's a lot of information in this video because it is made specifically for people that are super beginners. If you're not a super beginner but you still want to paint along with me, that's totally fine. I've got some timestamps down below. Just skip to the spot where we start the project. So this is divided into 3 sections. I've got some info on resource books about watercolor, in case you wanted some in-depth info. I've got info about the supplies, and then at the end is the actual project. All right? Now, when it comes to supplies, I'm going to list those in the description, okay? Main things you would need: watercolor paper and watercolor, all right? But I'm going to list some of the other supplies into the description, okay? All right, let's get to painting. Well, hello again and welcome back to another episode. Today I am working with a new paper that I've never worked with before. This is circular watercolor paper, and it is all fastened together in a singular block. So the sheets don't come off just like a regular paper pad. There's actually glue bound all around the edges here, and that holds the paper in place and holds the paper flat while you are painting. So this was pretty cool. This was gifted to me. I was visiting my best friend up in New York. I'm all the way in Texas, and so it was really cool to go and visit her. So I was visiting her. We saw an art store that was connected to a bookstore. It was the coolest thing ever, and I saw this paper, and she was like, let me get it for you as a gift. So I am using her gift so that way I can see how it is, because I've not only never worked with circular watercolor paper, but I've never worked with watercolor paper that's in a block, okay? So how this works, and there are papers that are in a rectangular block. It's not always going to be a circular block, but I'll kind of focus it more so you can see. See how there's like a little gap here? And then there's the glue that goes all the way around. So there's just this little gap here, and you would use, like, it says a letter opener, but you can use like a palette knife, and you would just kind of stick it in between there once the painting is dry, and you would go around all the edges, and that's how you would release the paper from the block. So that is something I've never used before, so that'll be interesting. I've never used block watercolor paper before, so I'm hoping it helps things out, because then I don't have to use tape to tape this down to the table. So I'm going to show you a few little resources and some supplies that we're going to be using today that'll help you along when you're getting started. As some of you may or may not know, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, I'm a former art teacher. I taught K through 12 art for just under 10 years. So I love showing adults different references that you can use whenever you're starting out with watercolor or just any medium that you're starting off with, because it really does help to kind of browse a book. Sometimes if you try a media you've never used before, you're not sure where to start, references help out a lot. So this is a paper directory. Now, it's not going to be every watercolor paper known to man, but it's a great guide in showing you what some different textures are for watercolor papers, and also what type of materials you can use on them and what those materials look like when you use them on those different papers. So a lot of these will give you the kind of rating down here, how absorbent is the paper, how fast does the paint absorb into the paper, because remember, watercolor, you're adding quite a bit of water sometimes if you're dulling down your colors a lot. So if you have a paper that's too thin, that's going to mess things up. So this has a great guide on here for all these different papers, and it shows you what those papers stand up to and what type of different materials you can use on those. So there's unusual papers, there's well-known papers. Of course, it's not going to be every single paper in the entire world, but it's a great start if you're super curious about the different watercolor papers that are available. Okay, so this one here, Watercolor Artist Paper Directory, that is an excellent book to look through. And of course, I get all of these at like half price books. If I find any sort of used bookstore, that's where I usually look to find my reference books. So as you can see, this one was from Half Price Books. I got this years ago. The Watercolor Artist Bible. Now, these are really short and concise. These aren't going to be, because I think they have one for acrylic. I think they've got one for like drawing. So these aren't going to be super detailed, but if you just need like some quick references, it has all sorts of like, you know, basic techniques for you to do. things to do about, you know, edges and that sort of thing. So this one's nice to just get a quick start and some quick basics for watercolor painting. If you don't want a ton of detail, you just kind of want an easy book to help you get started. So that's in the Watercolor Artist Bible. Then this one, I've shown this one before. I love it. Absolutely love it. I used this the whole time I was teaching, even before that, before I was teaching. And it's an introduction to art techniques. So I have all sorts of tabs and things in this book. I probably wrote some notes in there somewhere, but there is a huge chapter on watercolor. It doesn't just cover watercolor, it covers drawing, painting, all sorts of different techniques. So if you are super into learning more about art and you want something a little bit more in depth, this is definitely a fabulous book. Now, of course, this one came out in like 95, I think, is when that might be the first edition that it was in 1995. But for art, a lot of the techniques are still applicable, even though this book is old. I was about to say, it's only like 10 years old, because I was born in 84, so sometimes I can't believe that the 90s were that long ago. But if you're wanting to get real in-depth with like drawing and trying to learn about perspective and learning different sorts of things that you can do with making paintings, learning about color theory, this book legitimately has everything. So instead of buying multiple books, you could just get this one, okay? Not sponsored by any of these people. I just like people having the knowledge that they need and knowing where to find it. So this is an excellent book for that. So now we can kind of get into what materials you're going to be using or could use. These are just going to be materials I'm going to use today for our project. First off, you're going to need some watercolor. Now, I've said this once and I'll say it again. Don't hate on me for how my watercolor pans look. I use these a lot, okay? And when you use a watercolor pan a lot, you're gonna get some wear and tear, okay? So these are legitimately just the watercolors you would find at Michael's. They used to sell them in this pack. I believe it's like 28 colors, 21 color, wait, 28? Yeah, 28 colors. Then they moved to this smaller one. Technically, the colors are smaller, but then you end up getting like 36 colors. So you get more of a color range in this one, but this is the earliest one they used to sell. So they did come with a little lid here, but I always take mine off because I use it separately as a palette. And once these dry, you can legit just stack them, and it's not really that big of a deal. So we are going to be doing the Galaxy today. I'm going to pop up some pictures of some different, you know, galaxy themed paintings that you can kind of go off of. But that's kind of the vibe for today's painting. Since it was a circular painting, I was like, oh, it kind of reminds me of like a globe or a sky. So I figured a galaxy painting would be a good one to work with. So just some basic watercolor. Even if that's all you have is just some watercolor like this, perfect. I'm a little extra, so I'm going to have a few little extra things I'm going to show you that I'm also going to work with. Now, of course, we need some brushes. I've got a pretty good selection of some of my own brushes here. I just like having a lot of different ones to choose from, but mainly you'll want like a larger wash brush, kind of a medium-sized brush, like something like this one, and then a narrow brush, something that's a little smaller, like one of these. Now, if you really do enjoy watercolor, I do sell watercolor classes in a bag on my website that's got brushes, it's got a watercolor pan, there's some watercolor paper, practice paper, and I've got some washi tape in there, and then a sketchbook that's got watercolor paper in it, and watercolor brushes, like the brush markers. I've got some of those in there. So if you want to have all that in one spot, I have like 4 of them left. At the time of this recording, I only have 4 left if you want to get one. So I have a lovely array because I just like having the variety of brushes. I do have this old toothbrush that's in here because you tend to have a little splatter happening whenever you're doing the stars for the galaxy. And so it helps to have a brush you can do this with. If you don't have a toothbrush like that, you can also use a brush that's got some nice loose bristles to it, and then load it with water, and then you can just do the tapping effect like this with your fingers on it, and that'll work perfectly fine as well. This is where I'm gonna get a little extra. I have this set of semi-moist matte watercolor paints. So I had bought this at an art conference years ago. This is the Jack Richardson brand. So I bought this years ago, okay? And I still have paint in here. And the colors, see how crazy deep they are? I believe, is this a green, a dark green? I think it is. They're so dark I can't tell until I put the actual water in there and test it out. I know this one over here is black. And then there's like super crazy dark blue, indigo. Yeah, so these are excellent though. They are crazy pigmented. So I figured if I didn't get the dark color that I wanted from these, I could always, you know, kind of go in here and use some of these if I needed to. And then these two, you do not have to go out and buy these because they were expensive, but I saved up for like a month to get these from the art store. So it's the Fine Tech Pearlescent colors. I do have another one that's got warm colors. So this has kind of the cool colors in it. But these are, oh, they're so pretty. There's even a black metallic in here, but just the pigment is so gorgeous. And I was like, I gotta have these. So I saved up so I could buy them. I haven't used them that often because I don't use a ton of metallic watercolor, but I like having them because they are nice to just add into a painting. But just look at the shininess. They are so gorgeous. So since we're doing a galaxy today, I was going to try to see if I could mix a little bit of these metallic colors in that painting. So yeah, that's mostly the paints that we're using. The last two things, you do have to have a black and white, but again, if you're just using the regular watercolor, this already has black, even in this one, and it already has white in both of them. So this next set of supplies I'm showing you, you don't need, but if you want to be a little extra, you can get these. So like I said, you're going to want a nice deep black and white. And again, it already comes in the palette, so you don't need to buy anything extra. But if you do want to test some things out, or you've just seen these in the art store and you want to try them, then hey, go ahead and try them out. I have some different inks here. So this one is the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay Black, okay? So this is just a standard regular India ink, okay? You can actually use this in like the dip pens, calligraphy pens, where you use liquid inks. You can use it for that. So I've got that one. You can also find, and this is by the same company, all of these are by Dr. P.H. Martin. So you can also find this Black Star Waterproof India ink. So they actually have two different versions of the Black Star India ink. Both of them are waterproof, okay? You've got the matte one over here and this one that's high carb. So the high carb means that there is a high amount of the carbon in it. I don't know if you can tell how super, super black it is. They're both pretty super, super dark black. And it even tells you here on the side, let me focus in on it so you can see it. It'll tell you if you can use it for brushes, if you can use it for like a technical pen, or if you can use it in an airbrush. So it'll tell you there on the side. So that's nice. So this one you can use all three, okay? But this one is an extreme opaque ink, okay? So crazy opaque black. And this one isn't as opaque, but it's still a nice one to use. It even says on here it's excellent for use as a flat black wash. So if you're just trying to wash over something in all black, okay? But it does suggest using this one for technical pens because that's what it's formulated for, but that doesn't mean you can't use it for other things. That's something else I want you to know for art supplies. It'll tell you that it's formulated for a specific use, but that doesn't mean you can't test it out and use it for other applications, okay? So I'm probably going to go with the high carb ink today, and that'll be for like tree line, okay? Now, the last thing is also a Dr. P.H. Martin brand. This is the Bleed Proof White. So if you want to use the white in your palette, that's totally fine, but sometimes the white isn't as bold as you need it to be. This is crazy white, okay? So it's a bleed proof white. It's not going to bleed through anything. The color underneath isn't going to bleed through. It's almost like an acrylic paint. It is fabulous and I love it. So I'm gonna use this for making the stars that are going to be in the sky. So our first step is going to be getting rid of the label that's on here. Now remember, it said you just find the little spot here where there's no glue, insert it says letter opener, but I'm just going to use the paint palette here. Insert the paint palette in there, and you're just going to go along the edge in order to release that. So we're not releasing a sheet of paper, we're just releasing the label. Now, if it tears, I just tore just the top label. That's okay. I'm just going to start going around from the other side too. And I'm kind of just doing a gentle sawing action because we're just releasing it from the glue. Ta-da! And we're not trying to release a sheet of paper. Because remember, you don't take the paper off until you have completely finished the painting, okay? So this piece you actually don't need, and you can just throw in the trash. Or if you want to use it to put acrylic paint on it, sometimes I use these papers for like little paint palettes if I'm doing a small painting project. Because it's nice to think about reduce, reuse, recycle, okay? So that way I'm not just throwing stuff in the trash. I like to keep those things and use them for other things. All right, so our first thing we're going to do on this paper to make our happy little galaxy, we want to check our edges for any paper. Oops, see, look, there's a little glue on there. We want to check our edges here for any extra little glue that might be stuck on there because we don't want it to mess up the edge of our painting. And again, this is my first time working with a block of watercolor. I usually have mine taken off of the paper pad already, and then I just tape it down, usually using painter's tape. All right, so check all these edges here. I'm making sure to just scrape the actual edge and not the paper that's on top. There's a little glue stuck on there. Just kind of feel around, and I think we're all set. So I think we can get started now. So here we are set up with our paints here. I'm going to start off with this palette, and I want to get the paper itself wet. This paper does actually have a bit of a texture to it. So I want to get this paper wet. So that's where it's going to come in handy for you to have a thicker brush. I have water cups that are off to the side over here. Oh, make sure there's nothing else on the paper. I'm going to go ahead and wet my paper because I want there to be water here. Most of the time when you're starting a watercolor project, you're going to be wetting the paper. It's called stretching the paper. So you would have your paper taped down and you would wet it. Let me get all this to the edge. There we go. So I'm going to want some of these first layers to just kind of ooze out and bleed around in the paper. This is also why it's nice that the paper is already taped down. I don't really have to worry about it curling up on the edges. So I'm going to go for more of like a purple, blue, maybe a little hints of green color. So I'm going to get some paint on my brush and see how it's just kind of oozing around. I love a project like this because you can just kind of play around with the paint, essentially. It doesn't need to go on a specific way. And notice how I'm not getting more water because I already put water on the paper, and I don't want this to be staining the paper because I want it to blend. So I'm just kind of making these wispy little brush strokes here. So this is just going to be our base, and it's important to start off kind of light and then you start building up a little darker. Okay, so I'm just going to rinse this a little bit, and then I'm going to get purple going and get purple on there. This is also a nice and quick project too. Oop, I got in the blue again. Let me rinse it again. There we go. That's why I've got multiple water cups over there. Okay. Now, I haven't used this brand before, so I don't know how this paper is going to last. It seems like you are going to have this gap here from where the palette knife had to go in. So you do want to be careful of that. I have a feeling some of the paint's probably going to ooze into there. Also, it said it helps the paper lay flat, but it is kind of bowing out in the center. I'm going to add a little bit more blue. One of the things you can do on this, I didn't think about it till now, is if you want to get these really cool little starburst textures on your paper, is you would get some salt. Sea salt works really nice because it'll have those big crystals. Or you can just use some regular table salt. But when you know you're done adding paint, you would sprinkle on some of the salt. And then you would just let it dry. And it makes these really cool kind of starbursts on your paper. Now, I haven't decided how I wanted the tree line to look yet. I'm just still kind of going in with the watercolor. Now, I am performing one of the sins of painting. So instead of rinsing my brush, I've been going back and forth into the darker blue and the purple. Now, if you were using someone else's paint, my God, don't do that. Please rinse your brush. But I've used this palette to myself for, like, it's actually been several years that I've used this watercolor palette. I'm okay with doing that in just these dark colors. But, you know, if I was borrowing someone's paint, I would never do that in someone else's paint. Also, if you accidentally do that, just get a paper towel and blot it into the paint where you mixed up the colors. And you can alleviate that problem. All right, so I'm going to switch to my other set of watercolors that are a little bit darker, and I'm going to add a little bit more color on here. Probably add a little bit of green in there as well. So now I have my other paint. I've already added some water in here, and you're going to see, look how much darker that is. It's like crazy bold, crazy dark. And that's just with the same amount of water I was using before, but see how now it's super, super dark. So if you wanted to get super, super bold colors with watercolor in general, you just add less water. But sometimes, depending on the brand that you get, sometimes just having less water doesn't help. It's just, you know, maybe that brand just doesn't have a lot of pigment in their watercolor. So that's why I like having the different varieties of watercolor, because then I can kind of pick and choose which ones I want to use. Now, this paper is kind of making the color drip off to the edges more than I thought it would. So I'm just trying to bring it into the center a little bit more. We shall see. Now, I don't remember what color this is. I think it's a super, super dark green. Yeah, that's like a really dark green color. Well, then what is this? Let me grab a different brush so I can test this. Okay, that's green. I think this is the super dark green. Oh yeah, that's that's more of like an olive green there. And that's more of like a navy type of green. So I do want to have a little bit more purple, so I think I will go back to this palette to get some more of the purple. I might want to add some of this in there though before I switch, because that color does look nice. I'm going to grab a new brush. This is going to be a smaller round brush that I'm getting. I did add some water in there. I want this to be a little bit more pigmented. Ooh, there we go. Now I'm a little worried. Little worried about how this paper is going to hold up. Again, I've never used this, so this would be a nice little test. This might be a paper that you'd more use if you're not doing something that's using a lot of water. So it's kind of splitting in the middle right here too. There's like a dip in the middle. For this, it might actually help though to have that. Okay, so I think I'm going to be done with this one, and I'll go back to purple. But I feel like the colors are kind of starting to mix anyway, to where it looks like it's already purple, especially with that magenta I put in there. So I'm going to get way more paint on my brush, make it super dark. Try to get some dark areas on here. Now, this isn't like we're sitting down and finishing this in one sitting type painting. I am going to let this sit and dry. Once the majority of the paint has soaked into the paper, I'll probably hit it with a blow dryer. And then we'll see how it goes from there. All right, I think I'm okay with how much paint is on there. I know it's kind of hard to see on the camera. There is more purple on here. So I think I'm going to let this kind of chill out. I'll see if it flattens more while it dries. Ooh, I think since it's so wet, I think I might do some white. Do I have another paintbrush I want to use for that? I think I can keep with it. Yeah, I can keep with this one. So I want to make sure we really get it rinsed. I'm going to go in this white. Okay, since it's kind of spreading already. Ooh, that's not too bad. This can kind of be stars that are farther away. Because with the super white, the bleed proof white, that's going to be, I'm going to dot those on. That's going to be like, you know, stars that would be a little closer. Because if something's lighter and fuzzier, that means it's farther away from you. Let me get some more water here. That means it's farther away from you. But once it's clearer and the color is bolder, that means it's an object that is closer to you. So you want to keep that in mind when you're doing stuff like this, because it helps you build up those layers. Okay, now I'm going to let this just kind of sit and dry. I'll let you know about how long it takes to dry, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to start deciding if I want to add some little trees, like where I want to put the trees, and then we'll add in the final touches as well. Ooh, I almost forgot. If you want to do metallic at this point, I think I might want to do, because I do have the metallic paints that I totally forgot about. I think I might want to do a little metallic from this palette. But I'm trying to decide, because this is like, these can be kind of bold. Okay, I'm going to start off with just this one here. Kind of just rolling my brush in the color. Ooh, what if I just do it like this, like with the stars? Oh, that would be nice. I like that. Now, the thing I was worried about, this is what happens sometimes with metallic paints. Sometimes they end up standing out more than the paint you have on the paper, and then it kind of overpowers everything. Ooh, let me use this green color here. Ooh, that looks nice. Ooh, that'll be nice. These are great when they dry. They really do pop out a little bit more. Now, if you want to add some other colors on here, go ahead. It's not like NASA is going to contact you and be like, that's not what that's supposed to look like. You can decide. I just got like a little bit of a bigger brush so I can make some bigger drops here. Ooh. Okay, I'm going to let that be that. And I'm going to let it sit and I'm going to let it dry. And then I'll come back and add on the trees and the small little stars with the bleed proof white. Okay, I lied. I didn't quite leave. I was really enticed by this bright pink color over here. So I did add some of the pink on there. I'm debating if I'm going to add any other colors. I don't know, one of these green, maybe not that green. Oh, ooh, in the other palette there was a nice green. I might add a green on there. We'll see how things go. But as it dries, the colors lighten up a little bit as they dry. So as you're seeing it dry, if you're just like, ooh, I want to add a little bit more over here, as long as you have enough water in the brush, you can kind of add a little bit more to it, okay? And this doesn't need to look perfect, okay, especially if you're experimenting. So if you see some other colors in your palette while it's drying that you want to kind of add into it as it's drying, go for it, okay? Experiment, explore, see what different things you can do with the colors that you have. So now I have this nice and dry. It probably took about 15 minutes for everything to just kind of soak into the paper. And then I used a blow dryer to just get the rest of it nice and dry. And then once that was dry, I did splatter on a little bit more of the metallic. So look how cute that looks. So the next thing we're going to want to do is add on the trees. Okay, so since this is a circle, we can just kind of turn it however we want to figure out where we want the bottom area to be. So I think this area where the paint kind of blurred out a little bit more, I think I want that to be kind of the bottom. So I'll probably have a tree line go kind of like this sort of situation where I'll have some taller trees here and then kind of have them go down and then a few go up this way, kind of like that. So I wouldn't get a pencil or anything on this to mark anything off. You're just going to have to trust yourself when you do something like this and just, you know, kind of guide yourself with the brush and go along and start making your trees on here. So when it comes to making these trees, I'm going to get out some scrap paper and I'm just going to show you some examples of how you can make the trees before we actually commit to doing it on this paper, so you don't, you know, panic and feel like you're going to mess up your paper. So now I have this nice and dry. It probably took about 15 minutes for everything to just kind of soak into the paper. And then I used a blow dryer to just get the rest of it nice and dry. And then once that was dry, I did splatter on a little bit more of the metallic. So look how cute that looks. So the next thing we're going to want to do is add on the trees. Okay, so since this is a circle, we can just kind of turn it however we want to figure out where we want the bottom area to be. So I think this area where the paint kind of blurred out a little bit more, I think I want that to be kind of the bottom. So I'll probably have a tree line go kind of like this sort of situation where I'll have some taller trees here and then kind of have them go down and then a few go up this way, kind of like that. So I wouldn't get a pencil or anything on this to mark anything off. You're just going to have to trust yourself when you do something like this and just, you know, kind of guide yourself with the brush and go along and start making your trees on here. So when it comes to making these trees, I'm going to get out some scrap paper and I'm just going to show you some examples of how you can make the trees before we actually commit to doing it on this paper, so you don't, you know, panic and feel like you're going to mess up your paper. So before you start actually committing to your painting, I've got just the packaging I had from before, and I'm just practicing some paint strokes on here. So just practice controlling the brush, because you are essentially going to be doing a trunk for the tree, and then you're going to decide if you want to do trees that are kind of like this. They kind of peek up towards the top like that. Now this part is going to take a little bit more time because you're going to be using the paint strokes to make your trees. We're just practicing on how we want them to look. Have them kind of taper out a little bit more towards the bottom. Oop. And I'm not using any water. I'm just using the ink itself. So now that could be if it's like a super, super tall tree, you could make it kind of look like that. And you want to have those little gaps in between because that's how trees actually look. So another type of tree, you may have seen ones where it's almost more of like the branches of the tree kind of going a little bit more outward. This one's kind of fun because it feels like you're just kind of blotting your brush anywhere really. Please use a photo reference if you want one. You know, you can always look up online images of different types of trees. So it depends on the person, what type of tree you're going to want. And when you start them, they are going to look a hot mess at first. Especially when you're just kind of learning. Oopsies. Just trying to learn how to do it. But you can, you know, do that basic shape and then kind of fill it in. And remember, you want to have gaps. So you want to be careful on where you're filling it in. So that way it doesn't just like look like a block. And let's do this one over here too. This other practice line. Make this a little taller. Because these are just, you know, trees at a distance. So they don't need to look super perfect. We're not going to see every individual leaf on the branches. We're just going to see that basic shape of the tree. And it's almost like I'm bouncing my brush as I'm doing it. Okay, so those are some trees there. So see how these look really nice? They're just kind of like fuzzy looking trees. You can also do ones that look like this. So you decide on the type of tree shape that you want to put at the bottom of your paper. Okay, so it's good to just kind of practice off on the side because once you get it on there, you can't really do anything to get rid of it. So just kind of practice on some scrap paper, and then when you're ready, go for it on your final painting. So after all that practice, you want to look at your galaxy that you've painted. Now, some people might want to leave it at this and you're like, I don't want to add trees. That's totally fine. But if you do want to add the tree line on there, something that makes it look a little bit more realistic or just to have a little bit more depth is if you are showing that there is something off in the distance and then, you know, having something get closer to you. So if you had a tree line that was a little bit lighter, and then another tree line overlaps and it's a little bit darker. And then the final tree line is like super dark. Or you could even do something to where it seems like there might be some mountains back there. Okay. Now I have layered on so much paint on here. I'm probably just going to try to do just those black trees as if it's just the tree tops that are just kind of popping up in the background. And then we'll see how this looks. Because it's supposed to be like it's just you looking up at the sky and you might see some of the treetops on there. Okay. So I am going to get my paintbrush and then I am going to just pop this sucker on fast forward and then I'm going to start painting my trees. Well, isn't that lovely? I enjoy how this turned out. Now I do feel like things are a little too symmetrical. Okay, so I think I might pop a tree right there. I might do it. Are we gonna put a happy tree there? Let's do it. I don't like things to be too, oh my God, we're committing. I don't like things to be too symmetrical. So yeah, we're gonna pop in another one of these big happy trees here. So hopefully, if you've been scared of doing trees, I hope that seeing this, you're just like, oh, you're literally just kind of bouncing around your brush. And I am. It's mostly the end of the brush that I'm just kind of bouncing around and dragging along. And that's what's creating those leaves of the tree. And we still do want to go down here because there's going to be, you know, if these were in the wild, the trees would be overlapping quite a bit. So I'm going to add some more down here. Kind of work on this a little bit more to make it a little more uniform. But yeah, and I actually used up most of the ink that I had in there. So that was nice. I'm going to make this not look too streaky here. Gonna make this come out a little bit more. There we go. I like that. Okay, so really all there's left to do is use the bleed proof white. I did use a little bit of this white India ink earlier when it was wet to kind of blot on here to just add a little bit more contrast to the sky because it was getting a little bit too bleedy. The colors were merging into each other a little bit too much, the blue and the purple, and it was hard to see them independently because you do want them to have a bit of a bleed, but you don't want them to get so mixed up that you can't tell what colors are on there. So I did add some of that India ink, this one here, with a little bit of water. I did add a little bit of water in a palette and just kind of added that on there. Did I forget to record it? Yes. So just take my word that that's what I did. So the next thing is going to be using this bleed proof white. So I'm going to get a completely different small brush because the India ink is very, very strong and I don't want to accidentally mix that. So I'm going to make sure this brush is all good. Let me get my paint rag over here. All right. So I'm going to get a different tiny brush to work with. And the sun is going down outside, so it is starting to get darker in here. But hopefully you can still see kind of what's going on. Okay, so the bleed proof white, you do want to vigorously shake it. I'm going to carefully open it. And there it is. I don't usually use it directly from here. I'll use what's on the lid because usually whatever is on the lid is exactly how much I need. And I don't like pouring that out into anything. So I'm going to take a little bit here, and this is where we're going to kind of just blot on a few bright white spots. You don't want them to be too close to each other because you don't want it to look like you put it on there on purpose. You know what I mean? You want it to look random. You don't want it to look like, oh, she had a goal here and she was trying to equally space them apart. And we're not going to use much of this either. Okay, just to add a few pops of the white there. So, and that's legitimately all I needed. So that's why there was no point in trying to put this into another container. I just used whatever was on the lid. Okay, so now you can kind of look at this and decide if you want to use any of like the metallics and add a few more colors on there. If you have the metallics, I'm going to take some of this. It's like a really nice silver. Rinsey. Just kind of roll my brush around in that. And then I'm going to do the same thing by adding some little dots. These are going to be hard to tell until you see it. Add more water in here until you actually, see it in the light. But it does make a difference and makes things look really nice. So if you do, you know, hang this on a wall, you're like, ooh, silver. Okie doke. Hopefully you can't hear any licking noises. Both of my dogs are in here with me. I always record with the door closed, and Gigi especially does not like that, and so she headbutts the door. But this time it was Olive who scratched at the door repeatedly for me to come in. So for me to open the door so they could come in. So yeah, they were very persistent. So I said, you can come on in here, but you need to lay down and be quiet. All right, so this is our painting. And look, that India ink, look how fast that dries. It dries super fast. Also, I like using the India ink instead of just the watercolor on top, because look how the India ink has this really cool shine. And so it's a nice contrast from the background. So see how this has a bit of a sheen to it? And then you have that difference with just the background. So I really enjoy that a lot. I really, really like that difference there. So I'm going to let this sit just a little bit more to make sure it dries. And then we're going to get the palette knife and we're going to lift this off. And we're going to see if any damage was done to the paper underneath, because there was some bleeding happening on the edges. So we're going to see how that all went. So now, well, I do have some, got some paint that got on me. Hey, if you're not getting messy, did you really do any painting? So again, we're going to go on this spot where it's open. And remember, we just want to lift the first sheet, and we're going to carefully go around with the palette knife and separate the pages. Oh, I'm scared. That part feels really stuck. Oh God, did that rip paper underneath? This is why I've never done the watercolor blocks. It does scare me. I'm like scared that I'm going to mess up some paper. Oh, so it did start to release over here already. I'm like moving my board all around that's underneath it. And I'm not trying to speed through it. I'm just kind of pushing it in a sawing motion. Ooh, it feels a little stuck on there too. I'm going to go around to the beginning again and come around from the other side. Ooh, this side had already started to lift too. Okay, is that all of it? Ooh, that's all of it. Okay, let's see. Lift. Oh, okay, did that rip? Oh no, it didn't rip. Okay, good. Ooh, oh wow. I thought there'd be a whole mess on here. That's not, now how am I going to store this? So the watercolor, I might put this in a Ziploc bag so the rest of the watercolor doesn't get messed up. But look at our painting. I want you to feel proud anytime you paint something. I really do. Even if it's something where you're like, this turned out bad. You took the courage to try something new that you may not have done before. So no matter what project you're working on, if you mess up on it, still feel proud of yourself because you actually took that step to try it and see how it goes. Because that's often the first thing that stops most people. But you actually went ahead and tried the project. So yeah, look at that. No bleed through. It did have, oh, I think that's where it peeled whenever I was lifting it off with the palette knife. But that's on the back, so I think that's great. Now, something I want you to do, and it's something, oop, bumped the mic there. It's something I always forget to do. I'm going to sign the back with my name, and then we'll do July 2023. There we go. We made a painting today. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. I will tell you, next week is a fun one. I found some Care Bears Shrinky Dinks, okay? Although I think I can't legally call them Shrinky Dinks. I think they were called Shrink Film. Anyway, I found some randomly when I went to a mall that still had a Suncoast Records in it. If that lets you know my age, I am 39 years old. Back in my day, the mall was a big deal. So Suncoast movies and oh my God, it was cool to go in there. They had a lot of stuff that was used, you know, old movies I had totally forgotten about. And then they had some newer stuff too. But then they were also playing Twilight. And I was like, oh my God, it's like this store was made for me to stay. And so that was pretty cool. But I bought these Care Bear shrink charms. And I am definitely doing that for next week's video. So stay tuned for that one. And enjoy your happy little painting. Hang it on your fridge. Pop it in a frame if you want. But thanks so much for coming to my channel. I will see you in the next one.